Hello folks, this is another test before we start. I am endeavoring to get Lyndsey on here. If you could join us now. Hello, I add connection. Hey Mark, good to see you. This is just the pre-trial run here. I'm figuring out, oh, there's Lyndsey. Okay, now that you're here, Lyndsey, starting in about 10 minutes, but we're doing a trial run right now, how to add Lyndsey. If someone wants to help me out there. Lyndsey, if I get you on, let's just stay on early as folks kind of trickle in here. Yay, okay.
No, it's facing the wrong way, and I got to figure out how to do that.
So everyone, we are 10 minutes early here and just doing a trial run. So you're going to watch, if you're on early, you will see all the lovely bloopers that we're doing, trying to figure out how this works. You just saw Lyndsey's office.
Now you can see me.
Hello. Good to see you. We figured it out. I almost feel like we should just stay on the line since we figured out how to do this.
I mean, we could. It took us a little bit to figure it out. I'm glad that we did.
Yeah, great. So yeah, I mean, what do you think? Should we hop on in 10 minutes from now, or just go ahead and set the stage? There are folks here. I almost feel like I'm afraid to lose you, but we could give it a shot.
Yeah, I mean, we could. I think we could just stay and sort of, that way we're here. We know what we're doing.
Right, great. So I see some lovely people joining us. Oh, that's Patty. Hey, Frederick was able to join. So early birds, we are here early because both of us are new to Instagram Live, and so we wanted to make sure we could get on. So go grab a cup of coffee or tea or a glass of water. We don't want to start too early in case there are folks who didn't want to miss out on the opening, and so we will just dilly-dally for about 5 minutes as folks begin to gather. So we'll wait until folks have gathered, but feel free to, this is on the Enneagram and the instincts, and so feel free to type in any questions you might have of us in advance, or just say hi and let us know if you know anything about the instincts already. Let us know like what your instinctual stacking is, or if you know your subtype, just so we have a sense of who is here. So yay. So hello. And I'm kind of working this out here to figure out how many people I can see. Wonderful to see fellow teachers. I know there could be quite a few folks who are Enneagram coaches, etc., yourselves here.
Yeah, I see one of the therapists from Minneapolis here. Hi, Renee. Thanks for joining.
Hello. We're 5 minutes early for those who just joined. We were just worried, that we wouldn't be able to figure out the Instagram Live. So we're early and just gathering. And again, feel free, if you have questions already that you came bursting with questions, feel free to chime in on the chat, or even just introduce yourself and let us know if you already know your instinctual stacking. Again, this is my first time hosting an Instagram Live, so I'll ask for forgiveness in advance as to any technical or logistical difficulties. Yeah.
This is my first as well, so we're in it together, Nhien.
Yes, I've gotten to be a guest. Sarah Jane Case is an amazing host, and I got to be on her show. Oh, Patty, hey, strong, 3 strong 2 wing. Already know your stacking, social, sexual, and then self-preservation. Yeah, wonderful. So, Joe Marie, hello. So for those who are just now gathering, we did start this earlier than planned just to make sure that we could figure out the logistics technology-wise. So we won't actually formally start until the hour. So if you need to take a self-care break, run, get a glass of water and come back, we'll start on the hour for those who are punctual. Great to see you here. So glad to see you, Lyndsey. Yeah,
I'm glad to see you too. Nice to see people join us too as well.
I know, for the this spontaneous gathering.
Yeah, we were just talking last night and then threw this together today. So very quickly.
Right. So those of you who are here early, it was really like an informal conversation we were having about our instinctual stacking. I kind of inspired this conversation today to help people to like really comprehend, like when we talk about blind spot, it can really be blind. Like there's a lack of comprehension around it, and that's part of what we wanted to explore here today with you. So yeah, 2 minutes countdown. Hello, please feel free to share your Enneagram type and stacking if you know it in the comments. And we'll get ready to start in just about 2 minutes. So, yeah. And it's funny, I'll just chat a little with you as we're waiting here, that as we, listed that you are a sex, therapist, expert on the Enneagram, that I was like, oh, did people think that this was going to be just about that? And I wanted to be very clear that we'll be talking about all of the instincts and the stacking and how that plays out in different areas. Yeah, but definitely I wanted to know how that impacts you, in your profession. So yeah, still 2 minutes according to my clock. And
yeah, I think it'll be interesting because your first is my blind. So
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So hello folks. All right, 1 minute and we'll get started in just 1 minute. Hello. I see folks from other countries chiming in. My favorite E4 just hopped on here. So hello, greetings. Okay. Countdown. Okay. I feel like I'm so close to the camera, but I can't read.
I know, I'm used to doing other things a little farther back, but yeah, we get close up and personal with us then.
All right. For those newly here, I want to see, feel free to share in the comment any questions you might have, or also share about your own stacking if you know it. Hello and welcome. Here we are. Okay, it is on the hour. Welcome everyone. I'm Rev Nhien from Evolving Enneagram. I'm the founder of Evolving Enneagram, and we are focused on transformation through a contemplative Enneagram like approach to life. The focus of the work is really on sort of global transformation that begins with individual transformation, obviously, like from the inside out. I have 3 adjunct faculty, Christina Frank, Angela Eby, as well as Reverend Dr. George Gordon, who work with me to offer services through Evolving Enneagram. So we have classes, we do corporate training, as well as like small group work, weekly groups, monthly groups, like a whole host of activities designed to support you. It's sort of like with the approach that the Enneagram is really just the beginning of the journey. Like learning your type is just the beginning of a transformational journey in your life. So super excited to have you joining us here. And I want to invite Lyndsey here to just introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you and the work that you do. And then we'll launch into talking about the instincts, which is the focus of today. So Lyndsey.
Hi, I'm Lyndsey. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist as well as a certified sex therapist who uses the Enneagram in my practice. So my specialty is relationships and sexuality. And I have found the Enneagram to be such a huge tool in understanding where my clients are coming from, how it influences. I think that bringing this in has really helped my couples. And then I also do some presentations and workshops also around those categories.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And again, being new to this, I'm going to still try to figure out like how to do comments and such. But so I want to provide a general framework for why we're even here today. So what I have found that when I learned about my own Enneagram type, as some of you already know, I cried. Like there was this moment of going, oh my God, this explains everything I've done my entire life until now. And so it was like a big aha moment. It really shifted the way that I see the world, like really recognizing there's this lens through which I see the world. Later, it was only years later that I learned about the instincts. And for those who are not yet familiar with the instincts, frankly, it's still relatively new. Only in the past couple of decades has it really been discussed among like the master Enneagram teachers. And so we're still kind of figuring out like what role the instincts have in all of this. But what we're seeing is what learning about the instincts primarily helps us with is a few things. One is with typing ourselves, that we've learned that there are a bunch of people throughout like the past few decades who mistyped because they didn't know the instincts, that there's something about like the way that this instinctual energy moves through us and expresses through the lens of our particular type structure that can actually create like either it can enhance like the energies of the type, like a sexual 8 is going to be like an 8 kind of on steroids, right? Like there's a multiplying of the energy already present in the type 8. On the other hand, something like someone who's a type 2, who is traditionally a person who wants to be seen as a giving person, right? There's an identity around being giving and generous. Well, the self-preservation instinct, when that's dominant, what that does is that pulls the energy back towards self in order to like support like my personal well-being, even like the basics of my survival, like my body, my health, the conservation of my energy. And so we can see that if that's the case, then, you know, someone who thinks they're a 2, but it's like, well, I'm confused because everyone says how generous all 2s are. And self-preservation 2s have this energy that pulls them back, that wants to guard their energy. So if you know that, then you can more like, more accurately type yourself, right? And be aware of maybe some of the challenges in typing others. Like for instance, there are many women who may mistype as a social 7. Because, you know, 7s are historically seen as types that are self-referencing, right? Like I know what I want and I go after it. That's the stereotyped version of the 7. Well, the social 7 has this energy where the social instinct causes the 7 to think more in terms of like the group's joy. And so some of those 7s will actually sacrifice theirs sort of in the name of the group, or like they're more vested in uplifting everyone else, right? There's still the 7's avoidance of pain. You know, there's still the desire, it's an avoidance of pain through everybody else's like fun, happy kind of thing. But, you know, so there's a way in which that 7 is called anti-gluttony. Gluttony being the passion or vice of the 7, which goes normally toward things like I want. The 7 has this, I know I want it, but I have an energy that fights it. So you can see how learning about the instincts helps us to more accurately type and understand like the nuances within a particular number. And so I wanted to share here to give you all a framework first, and then bring Lyndsey in to give kind of an example of how this can look in a particular person. And so one of the major things I want to talk about in the instincts, I see a lot of stuff on Instagram where folks post about, oh, here are the subtypes of a number. And just to clarify what that means, what a subtype is your core number. So you have a number, and then you have your dominant instinct. And I should go back a step and say the 3 instincts are self-preservation, social, and sexual. And sometimes those are termed a little differently. And so I'll be doing, you know, more Instagram posts to kind of clarify like why I choose the terms I choose. So just assume that all of you have all 3 instincts, but you stack them or you prioritize them differently, such that one is dominant, you know, where it's like there's an assumption, like this is important, right? Like you have this basic assumption. And sometimes people can't even tell what their dominant is because it's so obvious. They just go, doesn't everybody care about that? That's usually your dominant. Like you, like when you care about self-preservation, when you're concerned, for instance, about the basics of nesting and nurturing, of the well-being of your body, it doesn't mean you're good at tending to that instinct. It just means you're kind of obsessed about it, like it's a focus of your life. Like if you're doing that, like you kind of just assume everyone does until you have this Enneagram conversation, right? And so there's something about how we have this bias that most of us aren't even aware we have. So that's the dominant instinct. So we'll talk about Lyndsey stacking in a sec, but I want to set it up. So you have a dominant instinct, then you have a middle or secondary, and that's generally not as neurotic, if you will, as you're taught. And then you have what's called a blind spot. And I'll just share personally that when I learned about this stacking, like I didn't understand why in my family of origin, I felt, well, I was so sad in my family of origin. I felt very very unloved, actually, and not unhappy. And when I learned the instincts and I realized, well, I'm sexual dominant. For sexual dominant, living your passion, like intensity, all those things really matter. And when I connect with people, it's like I could sit there and know you for, 5 or 6 hours, even though we just met. Like there's this desire to engage at that level. And then I remember, when I'd come home from law school way back when, and like my family wouldn't barely even greet me at the door. And I'd be like, why do you even want me to come home? Like there's a sense of like, nobody wants to talk, nobody wants to engage. And then realizing that the bulk of my family are mostly self-preservation, which happens to be my blind spot. Some of them probably social, but the idea is that when I came to realize that for those who are self-preservation dominant, the desire isn't for an intensity of connection. It's more for almost like comfort and well-being. And to get it that my dad just wanted me in the house sitting next to him. And that felt good and comforting to have his daughter home. And that was love for him. Just sort of revolutionized my belief and understanding around what love is or what it means. And I'll have more to share about, but I feel like I've been talking for way too long and I want Lyndsey to be able to share. So my stacking, sexual, social, and then self-preservation, way blind. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looked like and then how learning that helped me to engage my personal development and spiritual unfoldment journey. So Lyndsey, I'd love to hear about your Enneagram journey and how you stack and what factors led you to understand that. Yeah.
So how I came upon the Enneagram was actually through two therapists that I know here in Minneapolis. So it would be Leslie Root and Brooke Schmidt. We would get lunch once a month, especially before COVID. And for a while they started bringing up like this typing thing and this number thing. And I'm like, what are they talking about? I have no clue. I didn't ask right away because I wasn't sure what to ask. So it was probably, 3 to 4 lunches in. I was like, hey, you both keep talking about this typing and these numbers, and I'm really confused. Tell me more about what you're using with your clients. And so then they brought me to like, yes, we're using this thing called the Enneagram. I talked a little bit about how useful it was with clients. And then they started to train me a little bit on some of the stuff that they were doing. And I was like, this is going to be such an essential tool to what it is that I'm doing in my therapy practice. It sort of gets to some of the nuances of like, why are my couples or my clients struggling with this? When I understood a little bit more about their type, it was super huge for me. And it's been such a great tool in helping my clients, especially in the sexuality realm. And I think a lot of the work that Frederick and Valerie have been doing and sort of bringing that in, they're even bringing in more nuance that I was not familiar with that I think has been huge. And then I knew my stacking right away, but I don't know, that's not important. I don't need to think about that. So my stacking is I am social dominant, self-preserving, and then sexual blind. And so what I think is so interesting is like where you're dominant, I'm blind. And I think there's some really interesting things that have come up sort of in our group that we're meeting with, just of like, I don't get some of the things that you get, just because I'm blind in that area. And then the social. So for me, it was like, I had taken some tests. I sometimes come out 5, I sometimes come out 1, and then 9. But when I went to the Wisdom of the Enneagram, the Rizzo Hudson book, I was like, oh my gosh, like they know me, like this is me. And especially when I read the social instinct, I was like, have they been like watching me? Do they know how I present in the world? I didn't really want to be a 9. I felt like it was the pushover type. I was really I was like, oh no, I'm not that type, am I? But really the core things that are there are really me. Like the presence thing, like, does my presence matter? It's embarrassing sometimes to say that, but it has been a message so much in my life. Like, does it really matter if I'm here or not? Like, do people really see me? And then still a little bit, about like fear of disconnection, and conflict and avoiding that. But I looked a little different than other nines, which I think is where the instinct came into play. Because I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm really driven. I have this private practice. I work really hard, and like, it didn't seem to quite fit, which I thought was interesting as well. And that's where I think the social instinct really came into play and helped me understand, like, that's why, because social instinct is my dominant, and that's what I'm trying to seek.
Yes. Yes. Wonderful. So as we started the session out talking about, there's this notion of nuances within a number that where you're like, how am I different? I feel different from other nines, right? And so I want to talk about your choice of selection of social being your top, and how the social nine, okay, let's go over the entire like spectrum for the nine. So the idea is that the inner strategy of the nines is like the defense against not mattering, is one way of saying it. The defense against not mattering shows up more in the self-preservation nine. And by the way, hey Tom, I just saw a self-pres nine that I know joined us. So maybe he could comment about this, but it's like the way nines merge with their environment has to do with this often unconscious belief that I don't matter. But somehow, if I merge with what does, or if I merge even with a sense of comfort, I can numb out from that basic fear that I'm insignificant anyway. The self-preservation nine is more of what people traditionally think of when they think of the nine, stereotypically, right? So that's the nine that merges with the creature comforts. So a lot of people are like, oh, nines are lazy, right? The description of laziness, that sloth, applies more to the idea that like the self-preservation nine sort of abnegates decision-making for its life, like choosing anything that would self-differentiate. And instead, I'll numb out watching Netflix, sit on the couch. Like, there's a way in which I get to protect from this fear that if I showed up, it wouldn't matter anyway. Then I'm going to skip to the sexual nine, only because I'll save you for last. And the sexual nine is a lookalike. We just talked about this in one of my groups this morning. Is a lookalike to the 4 because it's a little bit more intense. Like all nines, there's like this ambivalent, there's this like not wanting to be center stage. But the sexual nine, like all sexual dominants, have a little bit more of like wanting that attention, especially from the special partner. And so they can be a little more romantic, a little more connected to their feelings. And but the merger happens with significant others more than anything. And so that nine is more likely to struggle. Like, they could speak their truth in other areas, but when it comes to like a partner, like that important person, or a parent, someone like significant to you, it's harder to kind of go your own way. And so just recognizing that distinction. The social nine, on the other hand, it tends to merge more with a cause or with the group. And if that ends up being the mission of your workplace, well, social nines then look like 3s in outer behavior, not in the inner sense, but in that like will work tirelessly for the cause or the good. I know a lot of like ministers who are social nines. A lot of strong leaders are social nines. And so that stereotype of the 9 of just like lounging on the couch is really just not the case. Many nines, like the social 9, can be extraordinarily busy. And so with that, I'd love for you to even describe, if you're willing, some of the more like specific aspects of your life where you're like, oh, okay, this is where I really connect with that dominant instinct.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. If I am really into a cause or I'm really into a group, I will do all that I can to make that group better. I will do all the work to sort of, I can almost be a workaholic. Like, I have to sort of stop myself and understand, like, here, this is too much. what is your capacity, and all of those sorts of things as well. And it's interesting to me because as I look at it a little bit more, and you would ask me a little bit about like, what are some of the challenges you have? I find one of the challenges I have as a social 9, which is really different than the sexual 9, is like I will put all of my energy and effort sort of into those groups and causes that I want to be a part of and that are important to me. And sometimes, which is hard for me to say, my partner might actually suffer a little bit because I maybe don't prioritize him the way that I should. Luckily, he's a 5. He's okay with withdrawing. But we both have to be, and he's a social 5, so we both be really intentional about like connecting to the relationship, connecting to each other, and kind of being there. But it's interesting to me because it's like, I have no problem advocating and asserting for myself in my relationship. I was listening to the Sarah Jane Case. They did the discovery track on the instincts. I watched that again, and she's like talking about how the sexual 9, would merge with the partner, and they'd be afraid to advocate for what they want and maybe move several places. I'm like, no, that is not me. It's interesting when I met my partner and we were thinking of moving in together. I was like, I'm not moving with you until we are engaged. If we buy a house, my name is going to be on that house. And so I'm very good at advocating and asserting in my romantic relationships, but I actually struggle to assert myself sometimes in groups, especially if it is sort of against what the bigger group wants. So I've been working really hard on this and making sure that I advocate and assert for myself, but I will find myself being like, oh, wait a minute, my thoughts or opinions don't fit with the group. I'm gonna then shrink a little bit, maybe be a little bit more quiet, not really necessarily say what my opinions are. And so it's interesting in that merging, like I actually merge more with the groups that I'm a part of than I will within my romantic relationships, which I think is a really good like nuance, just the difference between a sexual 9 and a social 9. But when I work I will go and I will keep going if it's something I believe in. Like I don't stop. I need to work on that too.
Yes. What a great example. So you can hear that distinction, that aspect that when you read these Instagram posts that make these broad generalizations about a number, and especially for some of you who are like, oh, I do identify with this number, but it's not exactly like it doesn't show up this way. To describe the behavioral differences, like learning about the instincts helps us to describe the behavioral differences and why, because, like you might be like, well, I don't have problems asserting myself in my partnership. Maybe I'm not a 9. Like if you didn't know the nuance of the instinctual stacking and understanding that actually the sexual is at your bottom. And so that the primacy of that is not as important as merging first and foremost with the group, and then second probably with wanting to relax when you get home, like relax on the couch, etc. And with a 5, I'm sure that has the perfection to it as well. And so a part of why I want to be noticing the comments. Yes, Tom, whom I happen to know, is a self-pres 9. Very interesting about the difference between the 9 instinctual variants. Yeah, the IV. So if you see the word IV, that's abbreviation for instinctual variant. Thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, and so a part of why we wanted to talk is, so Lyndsey referred to this earlier. She and I happen to be in sort of an interdisciplinary group of Enneagram coaches, sex therapists, etc., that happen to be talking about sex and the Enneagram, and we meet every couple of weeks. And during this time, we talk about how we use the Enneagram to support people sort of relationally and in their sex life, like literally their sex life. And we also talk about how we might bring this very edgy material, right, that can be difficult to talk about, out into the world. And you can see within our group like differences. And I know that you and I, Lyndsey, have talked afterwards. I'm sexual dominant, which has this like desire for, let's do that. Let's do the eye contact exercise. Like that's intense. That's fantastic. That's where I get jazzed. And then we hear Lyndsey chime in. I was like, oh, I would never have thought that this is an issue, because here she is, an Enneagram Sexpert, right? So she deals with sexuality. So the assumption from my own instinctual bias, right, for intensity, is that of course she's going to value this as well. But apparently not, or maybe not right away. So I would love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, not right away. I think for me, it's like when we talk about it, it's just interesting to me. It's like sometimes when I hear the sexual dominant people in our group talk, I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, I don't have a clue. And most of the group is sexually dominant, and there's a few of us that are not. But I'm just like, for me, it's sort of like, I need to get to know you before I want to go into that intensity. So, if I even think about like when I have dated in the past, it's more of like, I see you, you're cute, you're interesting, and I will want to keep sort of building on the relationship to see if it's something that I actually want to pursue. And then when I hear you say, I'm like, what is this instant, like, oh, I got to get to know you. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense to me. And it seems so confusing. I'm like, what is that? Is there something that I should know that I don't know? And when you guys brought up that exercise, I was like, my heart was like beating. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't know. I mean, maybe with one of you that I know really well, but like a stranger, I don't know about that. And so it's interesting to me, just even thinking in that perspective of like comfortability with different instincts and like what we, what we're willing to go towards or not, right? Like even when I heard you talk about, your family and sort of how your dad, I'm like, that's kind of how I am, and I think about just like even past partners that I've had where it was like, they wanted that and I didn't know how to give that. And I actually honestly didn't really have a clue what they were even asking for. And I know you and I had that conversation where you've had partners in the past too, where it's like, you wanted that, but they didn't know how to give it because they were likely sexually blind as well. And so, I mean, I'm just even curious, from your perspective as somebody that is like, when we're not able to give sort of what the person with the sexual variant stacking, like how does that feel even for you? Knowing that like someone like me might struggle with like knowing how to do that.
Yeah. To share personally, historically, it feels like lack of love. I mean, I know better now, but like, so just to share a bit of my story, a very different experience. I don't identify as a nine. I identify currently as a one, as a sexual one though, which is, as we'll learn, a counter type, right? Kind of like it's a little more intense than the typical one, less perfectionistic, more reformer. That's the short version. But like, so I'll start by saying, unlike you, where you build into relationship, where it's like, oh, I may not even want to have intensity or have sex with someone unless I've come to know them like more emotionally, right? I build this like emotional bond and connection, which is more the province of the social instinct. The sexual instinct from afar can look like, oh, it's like emotional and it's love, but like I would literally like fall in and out of love constantly. Quote, love. Like I didn't understand that it wasn't love, but there's something about confusing intensity for like, this matters because this is where the juice is. And it took a lot of maturation on my part to get that. That's not love and that's not sustainable. And in fact, oh, whoa, I would just fall out of love a week later, I mean, a week later, like, so how real and how enduring is that? Like the social instinct is much more about sustaining, maintaining relationship. And the sexual instinct is about like this intensity, like where's the juice? And if you're not interested in that sort of engagement, it feels like such a profound, going back a step, the idea is that these instincts are biological. And so we don't want to trivialize like, oh, well, you didn't get your, the juice met. It's like for each of us, when it's dominant, it feels life threatening. It feels like threatening to survival if you don't have that. So in a way, what you talked about earlier, when you're like, if I'm not merged with my group and in accordance, there's a terror almost that can happen if we're aware, right? Like that arises. And so be aware of that for those of you watching and listening, that like, oh, the work of like pulling away from like the dominant feels like you're pulling away from life, from that which keeps you like surviving. It's paradoxical, right? Because the intense interaction where I don't even eat doesn't exactly keep me surviving, but but it feels that way. And so I want to say that was the beginning. And so this is a part of why learning the instincts is so profound for me. It helped me to understand that even love can be seen as in your work, sex can be seen through the different instincts, right? And so love can be seen sort of through the framework of whether you're providing what that instinct wants. You know, like for a self-pres, are you tending to the creature comforts? Are you tending to the home, to the finances? Like that can feel like love more, right? And so for me, with self-preservation blind and having my family give me love through that way, self-preservation, I didn't feel it as love. And only in later years did I get it. And then I was actually able to accept my family's love, like on a whole nother level. And now, and I want to get into this in a sec, but I want to let you speak for a moment to say that by cultivating, becoming aware of what was historically my blind spot, it's caused me to be more well-rounded as a human, but also able to accept love through different forms, through the different filters, right? As some group affiliation, and as feeding me, which is more like what my family will do. Like, you will not go hungry in my family, and that's the way they show love. But they don't even ask you how you're doing. And it was so like not relational, like this basic thing. Yeah. So Lyndsey, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I think it's interesting when you say that too, because I think what's happened for me oftentimes in the past when I've had somebody that, you know, now knowing probably had a sexual instinct as the top, like it would actually overwhelm me, because I'm like, whoa, like how can you feel that or know that when you barely know me? But in reality, they probably were. And I would sort of think of it more as like they're being phony, but in reality, they're not being phony. Like they're feeling something that they want to connect to that I'm offering, right? Because the way that I do it is the building, but the way that they do it is like I feel this connection or this intensity towards you. And so for me, it's been a little bit of accepting that. And, you know, I still need to work on how to get in touch with my sexual instinct, because it's something I feel like I still have a lot of blindness to. I need to understand a little bit more, but like that it's okay to feel intensity towards things, that there is things that are meant to kind of drive you, and that there's passion, and really, you know, bringing that in and allowing that to happen, where I feel like sometimes I'm kind of like, I don't know what that is, and I'm not really going to pay attention to that. And so I think for me, it's being able to pay attention to that in a bigger way than I ever have in the past. But yeah, I mean, I think that this has been huge for me. I'm like, oh, so that person, when they were doing that, where I thought they were being phony, or, you know, what are you doing? Like, they weren't. That was who they were, and they wanted me to see that intensity that they had and how they connected or how they related or how they interacted with me. And it makes more sense now. And I have some like generosity almost for, wow, like I made some judgments about what that meant that in reality wasn't true. And so it's, you know, humbling in some ways to recognize like, no, when that energy came towards me, it was real.
Right.
It wasn't to get something.
That's
Yeah.
profound. I mean, that's part of the journey of the Enneagram, of how we talk about how it establishes a space, a field of empathy that we didn't have in the past through this understanding of different perspectives. I want to note some of the comments that are happening here. I see that Sam's here, welcome, and self-pres blind problems, you can relate. And I see Valerie as well. I'm so grateful for each one of you joining us. Do not hesitate to ask a question at the very end. We'll wrap this up in a few minutes. This is the very first one. I didn't intend it to be very long, just as a little teaser. But if you do have a question, feel free to chime in. But the thing that Lyndsey said is what I want to highlight. And I'm about to do a post on instinctual blind spots. So earlier I shared how many of the posts here, wonderful posts on Instagram about that share the subtype, right? Which is your dominant instinct plus your number. But I don't really see people talking about the blind spot a lot. And I feel like when we talk about empathy, when we talk about integration, it's an understanding of what can the blind spot do? What does it look like in each of the numbers? And how does conscious attention to it, which means, as we said earlier, the frightening aspect of attending to something that's not your dominant, it feels life-threatening. So there's something about, like Lyndsey, you're talking about paying attention to the sexual. Well, to do that, to have that intensity, you got to take your attention off of the group as a whole. And so that jeopardizes something, that feels like it threatens something. And then for me, I'll share that. And so that's one piece. The other piece is you tend to judge a lot of us tend to judge why people value what's in our blind spot. And so this is huge when I work with couples in relationship and understand that, oh, it's not usually number differences on the Enneagram, it's actually stacking differences. And often when one partner is dominant in one area and one is blind in the other, like, I don't see why they need that. Like, I don't get it. They really don't. Like they really don't see. They're not willfully withholding that from you, you know, to really get that is one piece. And the other is the piece about judgment. Because I'll be honest, and I know, like, I work with a lot of folks who are self-preservation now, and like self-preservation dominant. But when I was younger, it's like, why are people talking about food? Who cares? Like I was so judgy, so judgy, like, because it was my blind spot. And you mentioned this as well, Lyndsey, in our blind spot, like secretly, or maybe not so secretly, we're actually afraid that we totally suck at it. Like we haven't placed attention on it. And so I remember, I mean, I was a straight A student, but I thought I was stupid growing up because everyone in my family was so skilled at basic like things around the house. And like I was oblivious to them. And I really felt like everyone just had this basic assumption, don't you know how to do that? Like there's the oven, like figure it out, you know, like, and it was realizing that it was actually just never on my radar, that it was literally a blind spot. My attention didn't go to that. It went to, where's the juice? Where's the aliveness? Where's the life, right? And similar to when you talked about like paying attention to your blind spot, when sexual dominant tries to pay attention to self-preservation blind spot, it feels life-threatening in that it feels like a living death. Like just, I mean, I would like say, just shoot me now if I have to do this. Like if I have to do like financial budgeting, caring for the house, just shoot me now. You know, I might as well die. Like that's how it actually feels. And it was only through cultivating my instinctual blind spot was I able to go, oh, I can't live my true passion, which tends to jump around a lot, without stabilizing through the development of my self-preservation blind spot. And now, oh, I'm proud that like my credit, I have like one of like almost the perfect credit score right now. Like that wasn't even on my radar. Like who cares about what your credit score is? Like the cultivation of these basics of life that supported me in living my passion was deeply informed by this Enneagram work. And I see a question from Stacy. Could you do post on tapping into your blind spot? Absolutely. And that is my hope. I want to describe all of the numbers and how they interact with the dominant as well as like the blind spot, so you can get a sense of what that looks like. And then we'll explore in this series on Instagram, and maybe we'll have others back as well to talk about that. Like, how do we start developing it? One of the ways is, again, simply bringing your attention to those areas. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Again, this is just a little preview, but simply by placing attention, and you'll feel the threat, like your system doesn't want to pay attention. You know, for the suppress can feel monotonous. And as Lyndsey so beautifully described earlier, like the sexual, and I've heard so many people say this, I want you to know, if you're sexual blind out there, it does feel like this mysterious thing people talk about. Like, what are they even talking about? It's like the system isn't clued into this little chemistry hit. Like, I know who someone special across the room is paying attention. Like, there's this like ding, 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 you know, kind of that like sexual blinds, like, oh, they like me? You know?
I was often oblivious when people were interested.
We just recognize it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
and not understand, we all have an area of obliviousness, but you can actually work on it. You can actually shift it. And I want to say that I'm not saying everyone should be equal in all. I don't believe in sort of a uniformity of human existence, but I do believe that if your dominant is terrorizing you in some way, like self-pres dominant, sometimes they're like so scared about finances and money, it becomes an obsession where they don't even live, right? You know, sexual dominant like me, I way over focused on intensity in relationship in a way that was destructive to my life, you know. And as you shared, Lyndsey, earlier, for those who just chimed in, like that you're opening up about how at home your family and partner can lose out because of your overemphasis, right, on the group. And so you need to like consciously attend to the other areas. Mia says, I'm a total beginner to the instincts. How can you tell the difference between your main type and the instinct that makes you look like another type? That's a great question. And I think just to honor your time, Lyndsey, let's close with this question, and we'll do, you know, like I plan on hosting a bunch more live sessions later. But I want to answer this important question, which is the Enneagram type is based on basically your core motivation, and is defined by what is known as your emotional habit plus your mental habit. In other words, it's defined by the passion or vice of your type. So again, for the 9, it would be like sloth, like that's the heart passion, you know, and then laziness would be the mental passion, the mental fixation. So those things coupled together create a system within the 9 that is laziness of attention to yourself. It's not laziness in the world. It's laziness of attention to self. That's core to the 9. Right? So if you look at the passion and the fixation of your particular number that you think you are, go, is that core me? And now the instincts show us behavior. How does that express in the world? And as we shared earlier, the laziness of attention to, and then sort of the merging with a substitute object happens differently for each of the 9 subtypes. You know, merging with creature comforts for self-pres, merging with the group for social, merging with the intimate partners or with your passion for the sexual 9. So you see how that can look different, but the core of self-abandonment, of self-forgetting is true of all 9s. So, so check out, research the passion, also known as the emotional habit of your type, and then the fixation, which is the mental pattern of your type. And if you connect with that, that's a good indicator. If you can't find which subtype you are within a number, you might want to check to see if you're not actually even in the right number. And so that's one way. That's just the beginning. So I hope that answered your question. Feel free to DM me. Lyndsey, I'd love for you to share if you have any closing thoughts or reflections around what has been shared here today. But I'm just super grateful for your time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like learning more about the instincts, it's really essential to the work that you do, self-work, or like if you're in my position as a therapist, the work with your clients, because that piece is going to give you the other nuance to understand like why the person is showing up the way that they did. And I think it's interesting because like really there's 27 types when we get down to it, not just 9, right? And the instinct is part of that. Because I mean, a sexual 9 and myself are going to look really different. And even a self-preservation 9 and myself are going to look really different too. And I can look like a 3, but I'm not a 3. So and that's how you know that. So yeah, I think it's essential to know and understand yourself and for growth, right? So part of it for me is like my challenge is to get more in touch with that sexual instinct. I think it gives you more generosity for like why people show up the way that they do and how you accept each other.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I forgot to DN. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but to close, yes, absolutely. And is there any book about the subtypes? The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut. And I'll put stuff in comments later around that. So that would be a great one. It only describes 27. And yes, like once we get into instinctual stackings, no one I know yet has written a book that describes all the nuances of like, okay, well, Lyndsey's social on top, but she's also self-pres second. And that does look different from social on top. And then sexual second. And so those are, again, nuances that as we go deeper into our work can be very valuable. And thank you, Valerie, for just reading the comment, loving this conversation, super clear and insightful, jumping off to inspire deeper instinctual work. Oh, great jumping off point to inspire deeper instinctual work. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, so the Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut is like pretty helpful in that. There are other books like Ginger Lapik Boga has a book on typing, and she does address like the instinctual variants. So that's a helpful, like shorter little book to help you type. Hey, Lisa, thank you. Thank you, Tom. And again, a part of why I wanted to do this is you'll see that this upcoming Instagram series is kind of extensive, and I'm taking time to prep. And the reason I'm doing it is it is deep. It's wonderful and luscious though. So part of my plea here is have patience to not jump into like, oh, I want to know this right away, but like set the stage and get to know this. And then if your dominant is sabotaging your life, hey, take a look at your blind spot and see how that goes in terms of helping to create balance. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jo Marie, for chiming in. And yeah, and Sam, thanks everyone for joining us. So
yeah, thank you for
stay
joining.
tuned. Take care, everyone.
Bye.